Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. This is a show for questions and discussion of chess and all sorts of chess subjects. For example, openings we talk about strategy, we talk about games. I'm showing games, more and more games from people who send their games in, and we're talking about them. In the meantime, there's a chat going on the YouTube channel. Hopefully you've got the chat open and you can participate in that at any time. We have a live chat. You can talk with each other, you can talk with me, and you can ask questions. Now, the other way to ask questions, and I'm going to address quite a few of them this week. I'm determined to get to more of them this week because so many are piling up, is to send them to me. And there's two ways to do that. The best by far is to send an email to askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at CHESSCLUB.com. So ask IamWatson@chessclub.com. Ask any sort of question. That's just a regular email. I can answer you by email too if you want me to. And then we'll have them for the next week's show. I'm also on ICC as John L. Watson, so you can message me, JOHNLWATSON. That's an L in the middle, so it's JOHNLWATSON. And you can ask me questions there. Of course, those messages tend to be a little shorter, but I've gotten quite a few that way, and they've been actually quite good. And speaking of ICC, the ICC Open is going on now. There's a couple qualifiers left. That's on www.chessclub.com/ICC Open. If you want to check that out, it's a big major tournament that all kinds of some of the top players in the world are playing. So, and also you've got chances for big prizes, and it's just a lot of fun. So let me see, what else do we need to know? Some subjects we could talk about if you want to ask me questions, or about, as I say, chess books and videos or something I didn't mention. I'm an author and a reviewer, and we can also do chess strategy, anything you sort of feel like. Now, the good thing this week, well, the bad news for me, because I spent much longer than usual preparing, but the good news in general is that I've got all kinds of questions this week by email, and in particular, I got a bunch of games. So I'm going to be behind on the games. I probably won't be able to show you every game anyway, but I'm going to be behind this week for sure because I'm up to about 7 games or so. So I'm going to try and show about 3 of them. So I want to be responsive to the chat, but I also want to make sure that we get in some of the material that people have sent me. Okay. Now this is interesting. I got cut off on the chat because I noticed Alan was up there asking a question. Hi, everybody. Wow. Well, somehow I got cut off on that. Well, I'll worry about that later. I do remember what it was, though, actually. It was about the Alekhine defense. So let's look at it real fast, and then I'll get to showing games that people have sent me and answering questions that people have sent me. Alan just asked me about the chase variation. It's funny. I used to play the Alekhines as black, so I had to play against this a few times. I have some good memories, actually. Yeah, and I remember one of the main lines used to be this. And I think I played b6 here. That was my favorite move here. I think that's right. I have no memory, but in general, I think b6, or maybe even here, for example, b6. I had fun with that move. Alan asked me about this and c6, which probably is the most flexible move. You can play e6 too. And this, I hope I got this right because it's not on the chat anymore. My chat view is off for some reason. So you might have to correct me. And then he asked about the move d5. So I guess my first question would be, the most natural move is d6, but I can see why people wouldn't do that because of e6. That's very scary. Yeah, because regardless of whether he takes the bishop or the pawn, white's going to get, oh boy, it's very hard for black to get developed here. Knight g5 is an issue, just castles and rook e1. Maybe knight a6 to defend e6 against knight g5, that kind of thing. But then we have queen f3. It's mate threatened. Well, not mate, but a real problem. And then just probably castles or something. And there's the idea of knight f7, so black can't castle. Knight f7 is a good move anyway. Yeah, so this looks way too dangerous. How about f takes e6? F takes e6. Oh, it's probably even worse. Just go here. I think. Yeah. And now on a move like this, which looks very solid for black, this really isn't very solid. It's hard to get the move e5 in, even if he could get it. Knight g5 is a huge threat, followed by just destroying everything on the king's side. This king is probably going to have to run this way. I don't think anybody would like this position. Also, knight e5 is a huge move. That's my first threat, is knight e5. That has to be stopped. And then there's probably just knight g5 or castles. I bet they're both good. I don't know which is better. Maybe just knight g5. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm sort of orienting myself to this question because I'm not sure what the theory is here. So now d5 makes more sense because it means that white could just go back here. This might be a small advantage for white, although I don't know, actually knight here has a double threat, doesn't it? Okay, so pretty much obviously he's going to have to take that. Let's talk our way through this. And you can take it either way, but let's take it this way first. Now knight f3 is possible. You're ahead in development, you're going to castle, play e takes d, and if here, although this is playable for black, but I'd probably rather be white here, but it's very close, actually. This is not bad for black. So far, I don't see anything wrong with d5. I guess the real key would be this. This looks pretty harmless after queen takes. Now bishop takes, I mean just knight f3 or queen e2 check. Certainly worth thinking about. The thing about this looks like white's getting way too much development in here. That stops him from castling, and rook d1 is coming. So it looks like queen e7 is forced. But then maybe we have this little clever move, bishop g5. Things are starting to happen that look really good. He doesn't want to weaken himself with f6, but now we have 3 pieces out as opposed to just 1 for black. This is kind of fascinating. I don't know what you guys think about this. I'll check the chat down, or if Alan even thinks this is interesting. And then we have castles queenside. Okay, here's Elliot saying horse bishop e6. That's after e6. Yeah, but didn't you think, Elliot, that white was just better there? In fact, I really hate positions like that. But we can take a quick look at that again. That was if d6. Yeah, so I shouldn't waste all lesson on or lecture on this one. Yeah, so knight g5 is a huge threat. I don't like black at all here. After this, you could just play either knight g5 or h4. Probably knight g5. What do you think, Elliot? This just looks dramatic. Oh, by the way, this is Elliot Winslow who's on here, and he's a top international master and has been in the chess world for a million years, so we're honored to have his presence here. So yeah, I don't know about you, but I think that's one of those. Now sometimes black's okay in this pawn structure, but I just think that particular version of it is pretty ugly. I mean, black will survive, but so I'm sorry. So going back to this, let's do a couple captures here. Yeah, like I say, if you want maybe just a solid game with a tiny advantage, maybe that. But if you want to go for it, you probably want to play here. And queen takes. Again, probably just check. And if he goes back, we've transposed. Oh, but how good is this? Or is black able to just sort of do okay here? Actually, we had a bishop on d6, didn't we? So black should take that position first. That was a better position. He really has to take back, I think. Okay, so queen e2. If you don't play queen e2 check, black just castles. How good can white be here? Maybe white has a tiny advantage here. Little something. Yeah, actually, this is worth a little something, but I can't believe black can't equalize with some care. So I like queen e2 check. So queen e7 seems right. And I was saying bishop g5. Now you could just take this, but what are the odds that that's any advantage at all? Okay, now the idea is to gain one more tempo with a rook there, like castles queenside, and you kind of feel like white's better here. A good player probably is fine with black here, but I'd rather be white. I mean, it'd be irritating. It wouldn't be something you'd want to play a lot. Maybe what, bishop e7 here? Knight d7? I don't know, something. It's just, look at the development. It's getting scary, even though black has no weaknesses, so it should be basically about equal. I'd be a little scared here, I think. You know, the other rook's coming in, you might get the 7th rank. This knight has various future possibilities. Anyway, so I'd say plus equals, and so much for that. So let me show you, let's see if we've got, thought knight takes c5 might survive. Interesting. Oh, you mean bring the knight over? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Interesting. I was thinking about b4 after that. I just assumed b4 was good, but I didn't look at it, Elliot. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, fascinating. These great position to talk about. Um, so so what do we have here? We have. I want to show you this game. This is a game by John Thomas, who's another international master of Elliot and my generation from Chicago, who's also contributed for years to the chess world. And this is a fun game because it shows both how a master. Now, most of the games I'm going to show are probably a little more instructive than this in the sense that the openings and the structures are more typical. But I think this is a good example of how to calculate and how a master gets an advantage in a position. This funny little this funny little variation knight g8 is played by Petrosian. Originally, I think I looked it up actually. Some old games with it, and Floor played this move. Now, generally, of course, everybody knows the move we just looked at, knight d5. That's the main move. One of the advantages of knight g8 is simply that this knight doesn't lose more time, either to the move bishop c4 or to the move c4. So for example, even c4 right away, white's gaining time to attack that knight and has a big center. And of course, that's double-edged. But a lot of people don't like the knight on b6 anyway. I think Tarrasch insulted knights on b6. So the idea here is that you've lost all this time. It looks absolutely ridiculous. And in fact, not many people play this, but Magnus Carlsen did actually. Tried this and won a game. The idea is to break up white. The idea is white hasn't developed more pieces than you have. He's just gotten his center moving. So the idea is you break up white's center. And for example, if black only had one extra move here, the problem is he's behind on time. If he had a free move, maybe he could play something like this, for example. I'm just speculating, but and he'd probably be just fine. The problem is he's behind on time, so white plays here, and white's supposed to have a small advantage here. And I'm sure he does, actually, because more people would play this line. So in this game, some very strange thing happened, which is this move d5, which I found had been played by a couple of people, but probably isn't real desirable. And because it doesn't pressure these pawns. So white played here, good move, stops bishop f5. One of the ideas of d5, of course, is to set up, get your bishop out of the pawn chain, set it up, have a French with your bishop out of the pawn chain, and play c5. It's just all a little slow, and that's an excellent answer because it stops. Now black can't put the bishop on g4 or f5, and that followed by e6. If he's going to play e6, it's going to be cutting off his own bishop. So black plays here. Now I don't really like that move. It's awfully slow. The higher rated players that played this line played the move c5. And even though white's ahead of a French by a couple tempi in this kind of position, it might still be okay for black. So I think the best move is just here. And I was looking at this position. If white gets himself pinned, of course, then maybe black's at least reasonably happy. But if white just plays here, then I think it's a bad French. It's just not what black wants. He's wasted too much time. I think white's just better here by a fair amount. And black could play this way though. It's not lost, obviously. Um, anyway, so in this game he plays that move, which is, it's good to get your pieces out, and it's good to maybe support the knight here and the bishop here, for example. But it's just so slow. So white plays that. Well, among many other moves he could play. This bishop is not very effective running into those pawns. And black plays b6. I think that's a poor move too. This is a good, reasonable player, Walter Milbratz. A very old game, by the way. But that's another pawn move. Just way too many pawn moves. He didn't play well this game at all. And now white makes a great move. White plays there, and that really shows the flexibility of a strong player, because almost anybody else would just think, okay, let's play for f4, f5 or something. Black was probably planning to play c5 is my guess, and probably e6 later. But once b6 is in, that's another pawn move, and it weakens the light squares a little, so white just attacks the light squares and really gets the attack going before black gets his kings, before black gets any of his pieces out, if you look at this. So this is a very good move, c4. I shouldn't waste too much time on this. So black defends. I just can't believe that's right, but this doesn't look that great either, does it? White's just going to control all these central squares, and it's going to be very hard and there's still this e6 idea, so that's going to be tough. Anyway, so black defends. The only problem there is that this becomes a target, especially after white's next very good move, or I'm sorry, 2 moves from now. Now the point of that move is that black wants to play e6, but is going to run into that. Or as the computer said, this. See, if you take it, you lose your rook in the corner. But the main point is he's trying to stop knight b5. And now John makes a great move. Bishop g5 pins. This is the move he wants to play, is e6. So I don't know what black should do here. This pawn is getting weak because if you can't support it with e6, it can be attacked with knight here, queen here. And white has a big lead in development and space. So black makes a logical move. And white attacks that. And if white could just take that bishop, he'd have a big positional advantage, but he even does better than that. Black tries to get tricky, and white plays a real nice little move. Because now if black takes, that pawn is cramping black considerably. Okay, so what happens? Black counterattacks in the center, and white attacks this pawn again for the third time. Let's see what else could he do here. Oh yeah, Richard Verber, another old Chicago master from the old days, recommended this move. One of the ideas would be to play here and put another piece here. The other idea would be to protect that pawn. It's a decent move. Nothing. I think what John did was just fine. You could also just take this. There's absolutely nothing wrong with taking this. And then you might play this move knight e2, protecting that and thinking about attacking. These are all just possibilities. White's much, much better here. So what he played was also good. And the idea is that if black takes now, you have this check attacking that knight. And it has to come here. And then there's going to be a bunch of checks, and the king's going to have to move. And this will be wonderful. So black, instead of that, played here, attacked the queen, and white went back. Now, John said he'd already sort of started calculating this combination. And this is a game about combinations and how to think about combinations. And one thing I wanted to talk about, let me make a couple more moves. There's an idea of taking on this square, which is getting very, very strong because of taking here. So black at least gets out of making that a check by moving the king. And white plays this move. And the point is that I wanted to make here is white's about to play a combination. In fact, let me just show you what it is. It's right now white plays this very nice move, sacrificing a piece temporarily. The point I really wanted to make about this is that he's been thinking about these sacrifices, this one and this one, all along. So people ask me questions about how do you get better calculating. Well, one thing is every move, you know, before you actually get a combination, you should be looking at the typical themes and possible combinations to play, and then you'll get the typical defenses and counterattacks in mind. So that once you get, once you're trying to screw up your courage to play a move like this, knight takes, let me see, what was it, knight takes here, you've already looked at it quite a bit. You've looked at the typical answers, you've looked at the possible replies, you're ready for it. So you don't have to waste too much time deciding to play the sacrifice. Anyway, he plays this nice, reading old copies of Illinois Chess Bulletin. I used to write for Illinois Chess Bulletin. Wonderful thing. Okay, we're getting a few comments here, but I'll ignore them for a second. Okay, so we take, and play here. Attacking the queen has to defend the rook, otherwise white's materially ahead. And now black's materially ahead, but white has made this fantastic calculation many moves ago, and there was the reason he played rook ac1, that now he can win the game with this move. And he's winning in a very interesting way. Okay, the queen has to take it. King comes up. Now, maybe he's winning anyway with a slow move, you know, rook here or something, I don't know. Pawn up, whatever, because black's very cramped. Probably is winning, but he actually had a very concrete idea, which is that the knight's trapped. So isn't that very pretty? That's a very cute way to play. And the point is that these calculations are fairly linear, and you just get better and better at them as you go along. But you can calculate this far when everything's pretty much forced. Oh, let me show you what happens here. The knight now has no squares. Okay, maybe you wouldn't have seen the whole thing, but you would have seen a lot of it, and you get an intuition for what kinds of attacks work and what don't. But this is a very pretty one, very long ply combination. And I don't know if I have to. I don't think I'm going to finish this game. He gave back the knight, and oh, here's a cute little last thing to mention is that white could just play. White played here, and won the game pretty easily, followed by just taking here and taking some extra pawns. But John points out he could have played here, and that's very sadistic, because now the knight can't move, and rook e8 is coming. So that would be even cleverer. Okay, pretty little game. I don't want to spend too long on it. Yeah, I think it's a cute game, Steiner. And speaking of Steiner, we've got one of your games coming up. Not quite next, but very soon. So let me get rid of that for a second. Actually, let me just talk about the next thing I was sent. I want to get through some material today. This is fun. People send me all these games. It's great. We're gonna end up showing probably more games. I think people enjoy those things, and a couple of them this week are very, very instructive. Now I got a question last week in the chat about the Scandinavian. Boy, I usually think I know something about most everything, but in this case, I really didn't know it. I think I've just barely seen this move before. Maybe because I considered playing it myself and didn't like it that much. And I didn't know anything about this really. And I mentioned possibly trying to defend with make the move e5, just because this guy's having trouble advancing as opposed to the usual Scandinavian, and maybe even playing knight c6, bringing a bishop out quickly, castling queenside. That looked pretty interesting. And in fact, Ivanchuk played this way against, guess who? Anand. Some good players have played this line g3. Tivyakov has played it several times. It isn't played a lot. It's definitely, and even there aren't even that many really good players that have played it. But nevertheless, I was impressed. I was impressed by this thing. Ivanchuk played this line, and they eventually drew. Now, as I remember right, and was this Jonathan that asked this question? Oh, God, no, I can't remember who asked the question. They mentioned playing rook b1 to play for b4, and I think in this position, that idea makes some sense, actually, because the queen is kind of stuck for good squares. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think black's just fine here. Oh, but that game was drawn, by the way. Ivanchuk drew in Anand. Anand played knight e2. And the nice thing about White's position, he has a lot of development, and he maybe is going to gain more time on the queen. The bad thing is that this black owns more of the center and has that nice open file, so White's eventually going to have to play d3, which is kind of passive, and black's going to have a little bind on the center. I would say this is an even game, and in fact, I think theory kind of shows, or theory such as it is, practice shows that. So let me just continue with that. Oh, most people play this line. Let me show you this. Most people play this move, I guess, to give their queen an escape square, and also because then they want to move their bishop next and they don't want to have bishop takes b7 be an idea. And plus c6 is just a standard Scandinavian move. And so it's interesting. And then a main line here, I like playing knight here. I think if White plays knight there, there just isn't enough pressure on the center. A good thing about knight coming here is that White can castle and play rook e1. The negative to it is that black can pin it, maybe try to get rid of this and then play that kind of structure, but I think White's a little better in those structures. And in fact, White has played castles here, and that's done decently for black. But I think the best move is to play this right away. Maybe it doesn't make that much difference. This is done very well for White, huge performance edge, and that's just because you have the two bishops really for nothing. And it's not as though black has played really aggressively in the center. He hasn't played c5 and knight c6 and e5. And so White has won these games. That doesn't mean he's much better here. This is just a game. Black should play here, very solid. This is what I call the restraint pawn structure because it restrains any pawn advances. It's like a Caro-Kann structure, a Slav structure, or a Scandinavian structure. And but I think White's a little better here. The move that has also been played is this, and this has scored pretty well for black because he's still got the bishop pair. He hasn't given up the bishop pair. The big advantage after bishop takes, by the way, for White was that he had the bishop pair. And black doesn't even have his usual, he has actually an even performance rating with this. He doesn't even have his usual black disadvantage. But I still like White a little bit. The computer likes this move with the 92 with the idea of playing like this, or d4. With a slight advantage for White, but it's very interesting and unbalanced. So I think g3, this is one way to play it for black, and the other way is just play an early e5. Okay, I wanted to address that, partly because I'd never seen it, and it's been played quite a bit more than I would have thought. All right, so now we have Steiner's game. We have the chat. Let me go back to the chat. John Hartman, hello. We've got all kinds of famous people here. John Hartman, the reviewer for Chess Life, the book reviewer. Great book collector and player and organizer and everything else. There's a story behind that Elyekhin line that I was playing an opponent that I knew, this is from Alan, played my least favorite Elyekhin line, the chase, and I knew played the Elyekhin himself. Okay, so I decided to play the Pirtz. What? No, you didn't. You played the Elyekhin. Okay, you mean in the future. Okay. So, so Steiner says, looking forward to this. Well, actually, we could do that right now, I think. Let me find your game here. Okay, yeah, we can do this. Why not? EX percentage. I got some instructive games. This is what I really like. It's not so much whether the games are wonderful or not, but it's whether they're instructive that really helps for this show, because I think that's why people watch. They want to learn something. And we do learn a little opening theory. This is a French, and it's a Rubinstein variation. Now you can play this Rubinstein variation against either knight c3 or knight d2. So if you're a beginning French player, it's a pretty good line to start out with. It doesn't give you the typical French pawn structures, which are all based on the move e5. For example, this move e5, or even this move e5. So you don't get a practice with the standard French pawn structures, but you do get a practice with what's called the surrender of the center, which is these kinds of structures, which Nimzowitsch used to like for black. And this is a very solid line for black. It doesn't have a good reputation for having a lot of winning chances. There's a book by Hans Langrock, who uses the games of George Meyer in particular to follow, who's a German player who plays the Rubinstein with tremendous success. I was very impressed with that book by Langrock. If you want to get it, it's a short little book, Russell Enterprises, and it's this is a respectable line for black. Quite, I've written about it a fair amount, and there's no refutations for sure. Black may not be able to get equality by force, but maybe he can actually. So this is called the Rubinstein. Or sorry, is this line? Bishop d7, c6 is called the Fort Knox. We've talked about it a little bit on this show. I still like white. I like what Svidler did against us. Before I was recommending playing this kind of thing. I don't know if you remember that. But I think this very simple line with this and playing queen e2 just gives white an advantage. But well, I won't go into that. But so the option is to play this move knight d7, the Rubinstein variation. White usually just develops. And then white very often takes this. That's a standard line. And then plays a move like, for example, bishop d3, and then black can play c5 to try to counterattack in the center. And then white can play bishop e3, bishop g5. There's all kinds of possibilities here. So let me talk about what happened in this game. What happened in this game was, and I should also mention maybe that this is a standard pawn structure. But I don't think white has anything in this position. This tends to be okay for black. Black's going to just play for b6 and take over the long diagonal. Usually white plays here. And white can actually force doubled pawn. Well, not force it, but the best move for black is, since there's discoveries on the queen now, is to run away. And this is very instructive, this kind of position. You might want to study the Rubinstein. The general rule here is if white doesn't have an attack on the king, this pawn structure is fine for black. A little hard to create a passed pawn later, but it's with two bishops. He has the bishop here. And this pawn structure, usually black's fine. He might be able to use this file, but that's really if white misplays probably. But just without the file even, this is a perfectly acceptable position for black. So I just thought I'd show you that real fast. I know Steiner actually wants me to show the middle game and the endings, but I think the opening is instructive, so it doesn't hurt to take a quick look at that. He actually requested that looking at the later part of the game was more interesting. So one reason I showed you that is because, okay, so in this game white plays here, and black usually plays c5 here. That's the main move. And instead of that, black is playing taking first, which is fine, and it's been played a fair amount, and then attacking the bishop again. So the bishop can retreat, and that's fine, and that's a whole different subject. Black will play c5, and there we are again, right? But he can also play this move, which is sort of the preferred move for most people. And in this game, black unpins. And I was surprised to find here, I think it's Langrock says he thinks that's the best move in this position, is to play there and allow him to double these pawns. And that might be true. Anand played this way. There's a Kasparov-Anand game where Kasparov actually played this move and allowed black to win a pawn. And this has now been played in several games. I think white has enough compensation, and even a little more than enough. It's not just that this is awkward for black. I think it's also objectively slightly worse for black. His queen is getting kicked around. On the other hand, it's very close to equal, so it's not that bad. Anyway, Langrock is thrilled with that. I don't understand why you can't play other moves here, like just h6, for example. I don't know what's going on there. Is this really that horrible? It doesn't seem that bad to me. And then bishop d6. But but maybe it's a little advantage. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit of an advantage. Okay, so black plays the most natural move, and white takes it. And this is what they played even more often than retreating the bishop. There are two moves, basically. The bishop's attacked, so you can retreat it, or you can take. And here's a fundamental thing in chess. In these positions, are you going to play for an advantage in development, which you already have, but you're going to maybe give up if you make one extra move like that? Or are you going to play to keep your structure better, which would be what this would do? This would keep this structure intact and assume that later on you've got, and you also wouldn't give up the bishop pair. Here you give up the bishop pair, but in order to get your pieces out really quickly, get them to the center, and maybe put the rooks in the center, maybe get an attack. So it's sort of a trade-off, this kind of thing. And it's surprising because players have played both ways all the way going into way back in the 19th century, this position happened, and players played both ways, and all the way up to today, players play both ways. So so that would be the other move. And that move, I don't know, can lead to anything. Oh, I wonder about this move. You know, the normal moves now are c5 and h6. And I don't understand. I think you can actually play this way. I think that's a reasonable move to get this out quickly. If white plays knight e5, which seems to be the problem, then this is actually fine for black, I think, because after that you can go here. And then this move's a blunder because of here, attacking this, and which will also attack that, by the way. And bishop takes isn't a blunder, but it's got the same problem, which is now white doesn't have time to take this because black will have a big positional advantage after taking here. And so white really should just come back, give the pawn back, and then play that pretty much forced because he's got to be able to counterattack so that black can't take here. And here black has a shattered pawn structure, so maybe he's got a little bit of a, white's got a shattered pawn structure, so maybe black's slightly better, drawn between grandmasters probably, but it's definitely worth playing for black. So I think b6 is playable. Nobody's ever played it as far as I can make out, but I was just having some fun looking at it. It seemed to be reasonable, and I looked at some other lines besides knight e5, obviously. Okay, so that's just an aside. See, I'm doing opening theory. I shouldn't be, probably. Okay, so in this game he took, and he played c3, and I think that's too passive. I think if your idea is to play knight versus bishop, you want to do several things for the knight. We've talked about this. When you have knight versus bishop, you want to either command more space, a lot more space, hopefully, get an outpost, or get an attack. One of those three things. This is slow. This idea here is slow, this c3 move, because it doesn't play c4. It doesn't get things going in the center. Sure, it defends this, but do you really want to defend? You don't want to give the bishops a lot of time to get developed. So I think this is an instructive game because the key here is to do things before the bishops become an advantage. In the long run, those two bishops are an advantage. In the short run, white often has good ideas against bishops, but that means he has to play more aggressively. And I think this is the most common move and probably the best move. There's a game between Wesley So from last year where he played this move, because it really discourages black because he can't castle because the bishop takes check. And it gets another piece out, and it gets ready to maybe castle queenside, put your rooks in the center. So I think that's the best move. Slightly better for white, maybe. Now, black can play all kinds of things. Black can play h6, no problem with that. Black can play c6, just a restraint center. That way, if white goes queenside, maybe you can play queen a5. So this is playable for black for sure. I like white by a little bit, though. I think white's a little better. Anyway, so in this game, he played c3, black castled, white castled, black played here. I don't know if that's best, but it's good enough. The rook goes vis-a-vis the queen. And now it gets very interesting. Steiner makes some really good comments here. He played there. This is very instructive. This is the first big middle game decision, is what is black going to do? He says, I'm struggling a bit here. I wanted to play c5, but I wasn't sure what would happen after d5. Well, absolutely. I mean, I would be very hesitant to play c5 because structurally that's so nice for white. First of all, there's a possibility of a passed pawn, but also just generally this structure is good because if white ends up taking, then you have this outpost on d5, and that tends to be, and a tempo, and that tends to be, well, in this case you could actually just win the queen, but in principle d5 is a good move because it leads to this kind of position, and this can be awkward for black. It's going to be hard to defend for black. I mean, you're not going to take here because you're going to win the queen with bishop h7 check, but in principle d5 is a good positional move. Interesting, I looked at it though, and rook d8 seems to be okay. Seems to kind of hold out okay. So that was kind of interesting. White probably gets out of the way with tempo, trying to attack h7. black just defends that with g6. White brings something over. And now I kind of like the idea of playing, oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can do this. Is that what I give for white? Maybe it was queen d3, actually. Yeah, it was queen d3, sorry. Okay, so queen d3, g6. Otherwise, black might take on d5 anyway. Sorry, queen d3, g6, rook a d1. And now black, really, there's no serious threat. So black can play slowly, and I think a good way to play slowly is this move, with the idea of bringing the rook over here. It's kind of fancy, but it's a good way to play, I think. And I think black's actually okay here. So that was surprising to me. Like Steiner, I wouldn't have played c5 because of d5, or I would have been very hesitant to. But as it turns out, I think he would be okay. Now, the other move you could do is this, preparing c5. I don't like c6 just because it's permanently slow. It's okay, it's reasonable, but this is another way to play. And this one is hard to stop. c5 is hard to stop here. This is where queen c2 was played. And I think you're just going to play c5 anyway, because the bishop covers d8. So I think a position like this, or maybe, actually, I think rook b8 is even better first, because then later this pawn is protected and out of the way. So I looked at something like this, and white made a move, and black played c5. But you could also play c5 right away. And the idea is that the normal answer now this doesn't do much now. You just walk out of the way here, and you're thinking about just taking this. One reason this kind of position is okay for black is because you can't get two pieces. You can't get a knight to that square easily. So it's not that serious an outpost on d5 once it becomes an outpost. Okay, what have we got here? Before I lose the entire chat here. Okay, so I'm going on and on here, but this is good because I think it's a very instructive game. And I think it's interesting that black's okay in these positions. Just shows how good bishops are. As long as you have some control of the center, bishops are usually going to be okay, even if you're a little behind in development a lot of times. Okay, but in the game he plays here, it's not a bad move. It's a logical move. Sorry, let me see what he did here. He played c6 here. That's not a bad move at all, because after all, white can't play d5, and you're right in the game here. And white played here. Okay, that attacked this pawn. Steiner thought that he should play g6. I agree with him. I think it's a little bit better. On the other hand, it creates weaknesses on the dark squares, so maybe it's just a trade-off. One thing about g6 I don't like is that if white puts a knight here, you would like to take that in a lot of situations, but that leaves these big holes, so you probably couldn't take it right away. So just for example, some line like here, black plays, I don't know what, bishop d7, what does black play here? I don't think I did any analysis here. But anyway, whatever he does, you're going to play knight e5 next for white. I don't think it's a big advantage, but it is an advantage, I think. So h6 was a reasonable move. It could be white's just better here, but because c6 is kind of slow, because you haven't gotten c5 in. White tries to gain a little space. And you said, I'm still afraid of d5 if black goes c5. And once again, I think queen c7 is okay. Something like this. Just something like this. And then presumably bishop d7 is okay. There's no queen g6 ideas. Looks okay to me. And I suspect this is about equal. White's got that nice little outpost, but black has a bishop pair and can just bring the rooks over to the center. I think this one's okay. I don't see any tricks here. There's no queen b3, doesn't mean much. Okay, so so once again, I think you should have played c5. I think c5 makes sense. On the other hand, white isn't doing that much right now, so rook b8 is not a bad move. White gets a little space on the queen side. That's a good idea. Black's just playing a little bit slowly here. I think instead of queen c7, again, c5 was a better move. In fact, rook b8 looks quite good with c5. Okay, white just kind of keeps maneuvering and keeps his space advantage. And this, now, I think white kind of messes up. Heck, I'm not even sure if he should have taken that, because it turns out this file is really useless. Maybe b4 should be played at some point, maybe even now, or knight e5 maybe. If black takes twice here and white takes, oh, he can't take twice there because there's a check. So he can take once. Black's okay here probably, but maybe white has a tiny edge. I'm not sure. A little bit of space. Doesn't look that good, does it? Maybe white should have played b4 earlier. Okay, so black's still doing fine here. White plays there. He's really got the wrong idea about this A file. Now he plays there, and it just turns out that just loses time. Black may actually be already slightly better here because he's going to gain a tempo with Queen B8. He plays Rook 8. I think now is the time to maybe exploit the fact that you've got the two bishops and just play C5. I think it's a good move. Keep the rooks on the board. Or Queen B8 first, sorry. Let's play Queen B8 first. Rook comes back somewhere and then you play C5. Hitting the bishop so he can't take twice here. And, something like this. And if he takes this and takes back, that's even better because now you've got this going. Black's doing quite well. He's got C4 as an idea. You could lose this as white. Not that white shouldn't draw, but it's not a happy position. So on the other hand, I don't think white should take, but that's okay. Okay, so let me see what actually happens in the game. What happens in the game is black simply goes for the two bishop ending. The only thing about that is that white does have reasonable. He has a space advantage, and these pawns are not that wonderful. So I like c5, by the way. I think white should play b4 at some point. It looks awkward because of this square, but what's really going to that square anyway? It's well covered by the bishop, the knight, and as long as you stop c5, then this bishop looks very awkward, doesn't it? So okay, I'm not saying white's better, but I'm saying this is a good way to play, or at least try to play. The way the game went, black was actually better again because you have bishop versus knight with pawns on both sides of the board. And both sides have pawns on both sides of the board. That's almost always a small advantage for the side with the bishop. Now here, because of that c pawn, and it's not that much. It should certainly be drawn, but okay, the idea there was to play c4 and bishop c5. So white played c4. I don't know how good a move that is, because black gets in here. It's getting a little awkward. Oh, and now white makes kind of almost a tactical mistake. Black's better here, but I think white could kind of consolidate here and not have that bad a position. He plays there and he allows himself to be pinned. And so f4 is forced, but now this move, and we're getting all this pressure going this way. So now it's bishop versus knight in a position that's getting open also, and there are concrete threats. So white pretty much has to defend. I believe that's a forced move. And black plays there, and that's too bad. That's a middle game mistake because it creates all these weaknesses, and there's no reason to. You're already better here. You have bishop versus knight. I think the computer gives queen a1 here, and that makes so much sense. I think that's right. Yeah, and gives a big advantage for black. Because you're threatening, for example, something like just queen f1, which attacks this square, keeps an eye on that square, and the king is exposed. Instead, black exposes. So this is your first real mistake of the game, is that right? I mean, real mistake, serious mistake. Because that allows white back in the game. I'm not quite sure why you even played it. One problem now is there's going to be perpetual checks for this queen here. For example, that's a good move right now. White should be fine here. He's not better, but he should be just fine. Instead, he played here, and black checked, and took that and played here. Good move. Yeah, so the only thing is if white just kind of goes to the file here, I'm not so sure what black's doing. I don't see any reason that white shouldn't be okay here. The king is too exposed, so there'll be some sort of drawing thing. In a lot of variations, there'll be a perpetual check. So, and I don't know if you had that much better here besides queen f3. It sure looks good. Maybe you should take the file or come back down here. But at any rate, white took the queens off, which was just a bad miscalculation, and good for you. You took and you said, I was confident I could walk my king over to the queen side and win with my pawn majority on the king side. That's exactly what's going on. Good thinking. The only thing I might say is you mentioned calculation last week in the chat, just make sure you calculate it out. This is quite easy to calculate because it's all linear. Well, it's not that easy. Actually, it's not easy at all, but it's reasonably easy to see that at least the main lines are going to be good for black. And maybe you did calculate, but I just thought I'd mention that because you gave that comment about your general plan. Okay, so let's just see what happens. Black is actually just winning this because there's nothing white can do about that outside passed pawn there. And I think it was a lot easier. You said that yourself. This is good if you calculate properly. I doubt if you did calculate completely, though, given what happened in the game. So you pointed out, that's a much easier win. It threatens this move. The pawn can't go by because of here just queening. So I think that's right. Yeah, that's right. So so he'd have to take, and this is actually pretty easy to calculate because you're just coming up with the king. And white's going to get over here, and you're going to play h5. So it goes something like, well, I'm not going to show it to everybody because we're going to use too much time in the show, but this is a winning endgame for black, and Steiner points out he could have won that way. And then what happened was just a calculating error at the end. I'll just zoom through this. Basically, black's still winning. Nice little triangulation here, although you could just attack the pawn directly too. And he counts correctly, but maybe didn't work out exactly, because what happens is he gives up that pawn and he queens his own pawn first. And the only problem with this is I think you needed to have counted this out beforehand and just get it more or less exact, because as it turns out, okay, and that move throws things away. And as he says, now you're probably in time trouble. The problem here is that white's going to queen with check. So you have to just count. You have to go like this and count and see what's going on with things like this. And it turns out it's quite easy, actually. Because once you get the queen and he gets the queen, you're going to have, you're going to be, now this move gets what, checkmated in two with that, and this move gets checkmated that way. Standard checkmate, by the way, you guys should know this one. This is a standard way to win when you have queen versus queen and the king on the side of the board. This one will win. But you needed to have calculated that before, or else this was not the right line to go into. Is basically what it amounts to. Because the way you did, and then the way you did it was to try and avoid that line. Maybe you thought now you could force the king to stay in the corner, but the problem with that is that there's a stalemate. So that doesn't work. So actually, after king f6, the game was drawn quickly. I don't remember what happened. I think black queened and white queened. Oh, it was a stalemate. Sorry, the actual game went this way. All right, so wonderful game, really instructive, very well played, I thought. Excellently played, better than I do these days. No blunders. You were exhausted, so I didn't calculate too much. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay, I'm going back up the chat just for a second, folks. What chess engine do you personally use when you need one? Right now I'm on Komodo. I feel like it doesn't really matter that much. I use an engine a lot because I do writing and studying and teaching. I teach students, so I do a lot of studying and preparation. I use Komodo, and I use, oh, and by the way, I recommend all of you try to figure out positions before you turn the engine on. I'm even bad at that because I'm just so tempted. Everybody's tempted to turn the engine on, but try to do as much study as you can before. You'll find some real creative ideas that the engine doesn't find. It's actually very interesting to do that. So it's much better for you to work things out before. Okay, I'm going back up the chat, and I'm just looking for things. Yeah, I knew, Steiner, that you were black. Yeah, sorry, maybe I didn't make that clear or got mixed up or something. Jonathan referring to me, yeah. Stockfish and Komodo, sure. Yeah, there's some new ones coming up too. John Hartman knows much more about engines than I do. He just wrote a big article about chess engines not that long ago, if I remember right. What do you recommend in the King's Indian against the French defense? Third move, Queen E, second or third move, Queen E2. And let me see what else we've got here. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, so let's take a quick look at that. I don't know if we're talking about it in the French or the Sicilian. We're talking about the French. You don't usually play Queen E2 in the Sicilian. Just because that move, it works better against that move, trying to stop D5. Here, black can just play traditionally with these moves. The queen just doesn't make that much sense there, so I'm sure that's not what you were asking. I'm sure you were asking about E6. Now you can play Queen E2 now, or you can play Queen E2 after another move first. For example, after this move. Like Morozevich has played both of these, I think. And if here, you can play Queen E2. Or if C5, you can play Queen E2. And in my book, I give, very thorough answers to these things. You have a lot of good choices. One interesting thing is 2 Queen E2, if you want something kind of fun and different. Okay, the idea of Queen E2, by the way, is that if black plays here, you're forcing him to take with the queen. and then you get a tempo attacking the queen. In other words, you're pinning this pawn. Even this position, by the way, isn't that bad for black, I don't think, but that's just, you wouldn't want to play it. One thing you can do, you can just play a Sicilian. A lot of people play that. And then when white plays a King's Indian attack, black just plays like this. And, white has a lot of ideas here. So it's not that, you should study this for both sides, whatever you're going to do, white or black. But it is sound. If you play it right, this is just great for black. I mean, fine for black. It's not great, but it's just fine. The other thing you can do, what I wanted to show you is that you can't do this against the third move, Queen E2, but against the second move, this is actually quite interesting. Because now your idea is to play D5, and if he takes it, let's just say there's a slow move here. Now, a lot of times I know white plays other moves in these positions, or let's even say here. You go here, and now this idea of playing queen taking on D5 is pointless because the knight takes, and that's a much better piece to take back. And then you just develop and play C5 and castle, and you're very happy. You didn't lose time with the queen, is what it amounts to. So the big question, of course, is why can't white just play there? And of course he can. It's a perfectly good move. But I think this is kind of interesting sort of Elyekin defense-like position where white's made a move that really isn't very appropriate, and black's made a move that isn't all that great either, E6. But when you add it together, I think I'm pretty happy for black. And I think I analyzed this in the book some. I've played this before just to get a game. It's an interesting way to play. Your idea is to play C5. Even after this move, I think you can play C5 right away, if I remember right. It's not a bad move, because this move you can play knight B4. And now you've got ideas of bringing the knight. You're pressuring the center by putting a knight on that square against these fellas. Anyway, it's a game. So that's one little recommendation if you want to get out of book. You can also just play, like I say, C5. You can play bishop E7. That's a popular line. The idea is to play here and be able to take with the pawn if he plays pawn takes. And the most popular answer to that has been B3 over the years, and sometimes this happens. It's considered dead equal. Whoops, did I? I think I kind of messed that up. Sorry. This happens, threatening to take there, and so white plays here, black goes back, and the idea is that black has committed white to E5, and somehow black's supposed to be okay here. So that's one way to play. I don't like that way, frankly. I'd rather play knight F6 or C5. Another thing you can do is play B6, because the queen's a little awkward on that square. Just play like this. Play a normal B6 kind of defense where white's not maybe very happy having his queen on E2. On the other hand, he is white. He's got an extra move. He can't possibly stand that badly. But what else do I recommend against queen E2? Now, if you played on the third move, there's a bunch of things you can do. One is just here, because after, like I say, if he takes there, you're going to take with a knight. And you can go back into the normal structures with this and this. White can play either F4 or try to play a normal King's Indian attack with knight F3. Morozevich used to just play the King's Indian attack. I don't remember the order, something like that. Now here's another interesting point, that black doesn't have to castle early in these positions. Black can play for an early B5. Maybe even now B5. This is a pretty reasonable move, actually. And the idea is that when you castle, you're kind of walking into white's favorite like setup with H4, H5, H6, and bishop F4. And you don't really need to castle yet, so why do it? You can always castle later. The idea is get your queenside attack going first. I hope that answers that question a little bit. At least gives you a start anyway. So let's keep going with stuff that people have been sending me. Oh, we also had a question last week about, sorry, let me get these in order. Alan, last week, I told him I'd show people this, showed me a Grunfeld defense game between, that he played, a Grunfeld defense line that he played. And I think it's very instructive, actually. And I went and thought about it a little bit. I think what I said was correct about it, but it was very interesting. This game is Grigorich Smyslov, as he pointed out, from Kiev in 1959. It's from a USSR Yugoslavia match. This is the main line of the Grunfeld. I'll let you guys look this up because we don't have enough time to really explain all these moves. But it's been played a million times. This is the old main line of the Grunfeld. And these moves are played. Now, Alan, was it here? Yeah, bishop e3, because you got to defend this. This is attacked a bunch of times. Allen already, I think at this point, played knight a5, and we'll get to that. Well, castles, maybe the move order was different. But Allen played knight a5 now, and when the bishop came back, played c4, and mentioned that it was like this Gligorich-Smyslov game. And I try to say that releasing pressure on the center this early probably wasn't that good. But the idea of what black has here is to try and play something involving the move f5, so that if white plays f4, let me just show you ideally what would happen if white played too slowly. Let me just make some moves here. Something like this, if white had nothing else to do. That's kind of the idea. Blockade these light squares. Now let's compare what happens in this game before us, the Gligorich-Smyslov game. Smyslov managed to get this kind of position in. I'm getting a delay here. Not sure why. Smyslov managed to get the same kind of position, but he did it by keeping pressure on the center first. In fact, he made a move he's famous for, which is this move queen c7, which is to keep putting pressure here. The idea is to keep this pawn structure flexible, and I think that's the right way to do it, and I'll show you why in a second. But let's just see how he handled it first. Okay, the idea there is that if what black does take now, this rook is attacking, and you've also gotten the rook off of the long diagonal. Okay, so white pins that pawn. He's thinking about trying to win it at some point. White makes a move that's probably not all that great, but it does stop this move bishop here. So white wants to play f4 without allowing bishop g4. Probably not a very good move. Okay, this is early days in the theory of these lines, though, so you can't expect them to play these things perfectly. b6 is so logical. Get that bishop on that long diagonal, and if white ever plays f4, you're going to try to use the weakness of e4 by having the bishop there. And white does play f4 here, and black plays e6, a good move. And now I'm wondering, okay, white played queen e1. Let's just keep moving here. The idea for black is to play, the minute that white's about to play f5, you play f5 yourself. That's kind of the thought here. And you can't do that yet. Now I think white probably needed to try f5 already. It turns out I think black's okay here just because he has pressure on the center, but it's also a very interesting move. White, by playing this move, allowed black to chase the bishop away and then play f5 and blockade the center. And now black's probably already better. This is very similar to what Fischer got against Spassky in one game, where Fischer was better even though he lost the game. So this is an interesting position, I think, to learn about just chess generally, what you're trying to do. When you have a big center like this, if you can possibly blockade it from advancing, especially because the bishops behind the center now are kind of stuck. See what I mean? The difference is if you'd gotten f5 in, I don't know, here or something, that bishop's free now to collaborate maybe in an attack. But anyway, at any rate, it's free. And the rook is free because the rook can take or operate on this file. There's two extra pieces that are free, whereas the minute that f5 happens, neither of those pieces collaborate. This bishop's sort of stuck, and the rook's completely on a closed file. Now, it's not that simple. There's reasons that they played this way, but it gives you a basic positional idea of what you're trying to avoid as white, and that's even worse. I mean, now I think white should, if white has to play e5, which maybe he does actually, now you have this move that Allen played. The point is, I think Allen played it a little too early, though, because he didn't have this kind of position. He didn't have white committed to e5. The idea of playing c4 now is you've got the d5 outpost, and that's going to be, and also you've permanently stuck this bishop back here. So c4 is a good move, and that's the move that Allen was referring to. And it's another reason it's a good move is because this knight now, which is black's worst piece on the side of the board, can reroute back to that square, and now it's covering the d5 outpost. It can go there. It's also covering f5 if white gets some pressure on that square. And so what happens now is black takes over the long diagonal. He doesn't have a checkmate, but it means that white can't stray very far because there'll be checkmating ideas. And I may not go much further than this because all I wanted to really show you here is that black has got white stuck. White doesn't have a plan anymore. Well, there's no way for white to checkmate black. This bishop isn't very good, but all of black's other pieces are good. This bishop isn't doing enough. It's kind of walking into a pawn just the way this bishop's walking into that pawn. This bishop is beautiful, right along the long diagonal. This knight is beautiful on this outpost. There's no similar outpost for white. White doesn't have an outpost that he can go to. Nevertheless, this is not a terrible position for white. He can hold on. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's just not what he wants. So let me contrast that with Allen's line. And let me take a look at the chat too, just in case I'm being asked some questions here. Here's Alan's line. Whoops, this is not Alan's line, so I've got the wrong game. Why do I have the wrong game? I think I know why I have the wrong game. Let me get this. EX. Anyway, I think this is really instructive stuff for most of you are just learning about a lot of pawn structures and positional ideas, and this is a key one. This is similar to what happens in a lot of other openings, this kind of blockade idea. Wrong window. Jonas Black, I'm a D5 player and I have a problem against the London system. Oh, Mohammed, I think you've asked this before. We've now had this, the veterans of the show will realize that we've had this question many, many times. On my Facebook page, I mean, I will try to answer this independently again. We have to talk about the London again, I guess, soon, but I'm not going to talk about it probably in the next 2 weeks just because we've talked about it so much. So if you want to go back, if you go on to YouTube, all of these shows going back to 2015 are archived, and you can see them. If you put in Ask the Master, Watson Chess, something like that, you'll see them all lined up on the right, and you can pick them. And then you might ask, well, how do I know what's in what show? Well, if you go to my Facebook page, John L. Watson, that's John, and this time there's a space, John L. Watson in 3 words. You'll see, especially if you go to my timeline, you'll see that I keep listing what's in each show in terms of openings. So I've listed the London. Maybe next week I'll even try to remember to take those London shows and just list them for you. So those show what dates I talked about those openings, and it's got every single opening that I've talked about. So what you can do is when you find the show, you can scroll from the bottom without having to look at the whole show. You can scroll from the bottom and just watch the positions that arise. And when you see the London, you can stop there. So it's a great question, and it's something everybody wants to know about. But I think I've talked about it so much already that I think I'll wait a couple weeks before I attack that again. You can also send me, by the way, a game of yours, Mohammed. Or even some analysis that you're having trouble with this line or that line. That would be a great idea. Email me at askimwatson@chessclub.com, and I'll use that as a sample to talk about. Okay, so now what do we have? I wanted to go a little further. Oh, Alan's game here. How are we doing for time? Horribly as usual. Okay, whoops, I still have not got it. I keep messing it up. Why is that? Let me try something else here. Yeah, my apologies. I had this set up and I'm not sure. Yeah, 186. So how come that's not working? I guess that was the game. One more time. I don't know what's wrong with me here. Okay. Okay, yeah, this is it. I just don't have it labeled correctly. Okay. Okay, so here's Alan's question. Alan's question was that he plays this line, or has played it, I guess, online, or maybe in a tournament, I don't know. He plays knight a5 right away, which is certainly logical. But now he closes it up already with c4, and I don't really like that move. I think it releases pressure on the center too early. And let me show you why that is. Basically, and he says the difference is that f4 hasn't been played. That's one major difference right away. And he usually plays for f5 early. Well, the problem with f5 now is that white hasn't played f4, so it doesn't have as much effect. And let me just show you. I think I give a sample line here, b6. If you play f5 right away, then just for example, just a simple move like that. And now what? If you play b6 like Smyslov did, maybe just bishop h6, just start attacking. This knight is quite a bad piece. You know, as long as the pawn's here, that knight can go, for example, to c4 sometimes. It can put pressure on the center from here. Right now, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So that means that black's got a piece off center. His best piece is being eliminated, and the king's a little loose. These make the, for example, h4, h5 is a possibility. So this position favors white. Also rook a e1, and you might get an open file. Whereas in the game that we saw with Smyslov, he had to play e5, and there was no open central file. So a lot of this is just timing when you do something like knight a5 and c4. And you get better and better and better at it the more you play an opening. You get better and better at the timing. So anyway, what I looked at instead was that, just setting up to play there and then there and then there. And the thing is that white just doesn't go into f4 necessarily. Um, although now he's got all his pieces out, so f4 probably wouldn't be such a bad move. The threat now is f5, and this knight's completely misplaced. And that would be very strong. That's a big attack. Bishop h6 moves. Knight f4 will follow later. You could possibly isolate that pawn. If he goes here, that just extends the range of that bishop in the attack. There's quite a nice attack going on for white here. So, so you could play f4, and if he plays f5 now, you have the new option of taking, which you didn't have in the other game. And by the way, black can threaten checkmate here, but you just go here anyway, defending. And you want that knight on g3. So you get the same position, actually. You get takes, takes, knight g3 attacking here. And then that's a good move, because that's the best defender of the king. And just for example, if black just tries to go here with the idea of maybe taking over that file, white can go up here and over here with a big attack. Let me just see if I can show you that. Let's say black plays here, white plays here. Black maybe, I don't know, attacks like that. White can play this move now and come back here with the bishop, chase the queen away. And if the queen moves, that's tactically wrong because of that move. And no matter how black takes, there's going to be a bishop d4 winning material on that square. So that's just sort of a sample line. I just want to show you that there's this option. You don't have to play e5. You've got white has options when black has released the tension on the center. White has more options. Okay, and this is the other line that could happen, is that white just avoids f4 completely. For example, this position. You could also play d5 here, by the way. You could just play d5 right now. Wouldn't be a bad move. Just operating in the center. Because black's knight is so bad. Okay, so anyway, now d5 is a good move too. So the line I gave here was takes and d6. You're going to get your pawn back. You've got a protected pass pawn. This pawn is weak on an open file, and this position is just much, and this knight is still a problem. So this position is just much better for white. Okay. I thank you, Pedone. I probably mispronounced that. Yes, you do have to have a Facebook account. Doesn't everyone have a Facebook account? What did they say? 2 billion people or something have Facebook accounts? It's some horrible number like that. Okay, so so I hope that sort of answers that question about the difference between the two different Grunfelds. So if you're white or black, you might want to know those for concrete reasons, but more importantly, just positionally. It's good to see how these things work, like these attacks on the center. Normally, you don't want to release the tension on the center unless you have a very concrete forcing way to create weaknesses. And here, he didn't really have a way to create weaknesses in white's position. Okay, now let me see what's next. I promised to finish the Chigorin defense outline, and I am not going to get to that. Yeah, this is maybe one more. Maybe we'll get started on that. One more thing. Last week, we looked at this. I hope I'm not missing any chat questions. Last week we started looking at the Chigorin defense. Someone asked about this. In fact, two people have asked about this. And I mentioned I have an ICC lecture series in the ICC archives. If you're an ICC member, you can go to the archives and see all of my old lectures about the middle game, about the opening. I have a D4 repertoire, an E4 repertoire. I have structured lectures. We've been doing this for many, many years now. And also, not only do I have these, but you have much better players than me doing lectures, like Yermolinsky, and you get access to the complete archives. Ronan Harsvi, Boris Alterman, and you have the wonderful shows like Larry Christensen's Attacking Chess, and also Joel Benjamin's Game of the Day. It goes on and on. So you have a whole library worth of videos that you can watch. And I really recommend becoming an ICC member, actually. I think it's really, really worth it if you possibly can. Plus, you can play in all the tournaments. Like right now, there's the ICC Open, which is a famous tournament that's extremely well attended by a lot of strong players, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm not sure, Steinar, if you can just go to Facebook if you aren't even a member, but maybe you can. Well, I'll look into that. All right, so in the meantime, what do we have here? Okay, the Chigorin. Last week we looked at e3, and remember black plays e5, and we looked at c takes d. We were talking about characteristic ideas in the Chigorin, and then white plays e3 because knight f3, e5 is just a good line for black. I'm going to show you a game with this. So you play e3, and then black plays things like black attacks in the center, white defends, and now white has this nice choice now between taking with a big center, in which case black probably just retreats because he doesn't want to be attacked twice, and I think black's doing just fine here, or taking this way, which was very popular for a while because of this nice little move here. And the idea is you're trying to avoid an isolated pawn by taking with a piece, and after you take with a piece, you've got two bishops, a bishop pair. And top professionals played this quite a bit as white because they got the bishop pair. And I showed you a way that I think has kind of wrecked this line for white in a way and given black easy equality. So the lines I still have to show you, and I'm obviously not going to get to, are knight c3 and knight f3. And I could just get started with knight c3 and then sign off here. Yeah, let's just do a couple minutes here. The idea of knight c3 is if black takes this now, attacking this twice, white can advance. And then black has a couple moves, but really white's pretty happy after both of them. And one of them is this. That's the oldest move. If you go way back, there's some very cute wins for black with this actually, which go like this. There's a forcing line. Check, attacking the knight and the king. Forces this move, defending the knight. White plays here, attacking the knight, which has no moves. The knight's trapped. So black has to either take this, in which case he's getting attacked again with the rook and the queen. That works out badly. Or he has to sacrifice a piece. And this is a famous old sacrifice that Chigorin himself, I believe, won games from this position. The idea is that after white makes a move, let's make a move, black wins an extra pawn. And this one's pretty weak too, and these pawns are very strong in the center, is the idea. It doesn't really work. It turns out that if white plays here and just breaks up the center, this ends up being good for white. So that line just simply doesn't work, but it was fun while it lasted back in the 19th century or whatever. And if black goes the other way, then white has a whole bunch of options. White has here, white has here, white has, do I have a thing with this? Yeah, I do. I have a game with this. But let me finish this for a second. Those moves are probably pretty good. A very dangerous one is this one, and then black can go back like Morozevich does, or you can go this way, but I think white's better no matter what. It's a slightly depressing line for black. So what I recommend for black, the other line, is not to take here. It's to play this move and just defend that square, and maybe we'll go over that next week. Yeah, I think that's probably the way to talk about this. Maybe I should just mention the outline here. White has his main move, which is there, and now black takes, and we'll talk about that at some length. And white can also take here, but then black actually has pretty good activity, because if white tries to take over the center, which looks very attractive, black can counterattack in the center, threatening to take twice or take and play bishop b4 check. So white naturally advances, but now black can play this way and just walk over here and put a bishop here, but he also has a clever little option, which is to go back this way, put the knight there, put the bishop here, and now that's an outpost, isn't it? That's a square that a pawn can't. Remember our definition of an outpost. These two squares are both outposts actually, because white doesn't have a pawn that can chase a knight away there. So you can put a knight there, a bishop there, a queen there. The knight's the most obvious choice. So that's kind of an outline of what we'll be doing. So that's why white usually plays this move instead. Or sometimes takes and plays knight f3, and we can talk about that. So, okay, I guess that's about it for this week. Do we have any more? Let's see about any other questions. Don't Carlson and Grischuk have a, I think they have a bye. I think that our moderator could tell us that. I think they can play if they want to with a bye. Maybe this year they're not playing. I'm not sure. There's some very top players playing, but I don't know if they're playing yet. So we'll see. They don't really have to qualify yet. They just have to say they're playing. Probably that's what you meant. Yeah, I don't think they participate in the qualifiers. No, they just get in. They have privilege with good reason. What tournament wouldn't want Carlsen and Grischuk in it, right? And who of you wouldn't want to play these top players by playing in the ICC Open? Wouldn't it be, it's a chance of a lifetime to play these top players. So, okay, folks, did I miss anything? obvious? I guess not. Thank you, everybody. I'm had a great time as usual. I didn't pay as much attention to the chat this week as usual, but I wanted to answer some of these older questions that we got on earlier chats and ones that you've been sending me. Next week, a couple more games for sure. Jonathan, for example, I think I have one of yours, if not two or three, but I do one of them anyway. And then I'll finish the Jagoran outline. And what else will we be doing? We're going to be doing. I have a question, a theoretical question about strong points, which I think will be really interesting. So thank you, everybody, and I will catch you guys next week. I hope. Tell your friends that we're here for free.